Sea Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming to you on Power Talk. Thank you so much for making us part of your day today. And without further ado, it's an honor to bring back a friend of the program and really one of the most accomplished and legendary musicians, producers and arrangers. He was a guy that was given assignments with his brothers in the studio. They'd have essentially a limited amount of time to cut one tune, but ultimately their legacy is carved out in not just the quantity of the music they've made, but also the quality of the music they've made, and it continues on today. Dennis Coffey, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Good to be back. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Just finding my way through everything, and I wanted to ask you just to get some clarity. I had a great hang with Mike Theodore. The guy is just legendary, and
Oh yes.
and there was a drummer. I don't think you probably know him. His name was Bill Vitt. He was from the Bay Area, but he actually moved down and worked with Don Costa a lot. Did a lot of demos, but really more known for playing in the Bay Area. And I asked him about when Motown moved, and he said he worked for these guys called the Paris Brothers, and he did a lot of work for them, and he mentioned it was around 68. I can't remember the exact year Motown decided to pick up and move, but they said Motown's moving down here, and Bill was ready to go back to the west to San Francisco, but he was really psyched because he was a big James Jamerson fan, and all the cats he played with, and but then he said it turned out that Jamerson wound up living in a hotel. Motown never really took care of him, and we touched on that in the first interview. But the thing that was revelatory to me is that he said that he didn't know if this was true or not, but that they opened a white section of Motown, and the first artist that they signed was Pat Boone. And I've seen a lot of guys like Tom Clay, and I've been noticing a lot of artists that were definitely not in the soul and R&B tradition, but more folk artists who wound up on the Motown label in the early 70s. And I was wondering if there was some accuracy or truth to the idea that they opened a white section of Motown.
I don't think they did. I mean, Barry, his vision was the sound of young America, and he hired the people regardless of the color. Barney Ailes being one of the people, and some of the other folks. So I think he was just doing music where there wasn't a whole separate thing when he had a few white artists in there. It was just like Rare Earth, that was the same thing as everybody else with the label. That's what I felt about
it. You looking back on it, I mean, when RCA and those other labels, obviously you were just trying to sing for your supper, but do you think that it was? How do you think Detroit would have? It's hard to say this, but if they had actually come there and started, they opened their own record companies up there, how would it have affected the city of Detroit, especially the economy?
Well, it would really have affected the city, but Barry had the key Funk Brothers under contract. The only ones that weren't under contract to Motown were me and Bob Babbitt, and so that whole scenario where RCA and Columbia and everybody, they saw the success of Motown, and that made it easier for producers in Detroit like me and Mike to get deals because the Detroit sound was becoming very successful. But then they figured out they couldn't get the guys, and that's because Barry had the Funk Brothers under contract. So that's when the labels decided not to do that. So that if that had been different, and Barry didn't have the guys under contract, and it would have been like Mo West, because I worked at Mo West too. There, it was all the studio guys, and even though they paid me union scale and a half, Motown never had a lock on my time. I worked for everybody. But it wasn't the same with the Funk Brothers, per se. I was probably the only Funk brother in Babbitt that were free agents. And it came to a point where even in Detroit, I was doing a lot of sessions for Holland Dozier and Holland at night, Harry Balk worked for Motown, and he called me down to the offices downtown, and he says, you're doing all these sessions for us and everything, and we don't want you working for Holland Dozier and Holland. And I told Harry, I says, you got me mixed up with those guys you got under this contractual situation and this escrow program, whatever that deal was. I says, I'm not one of those guys. And he says, well, keep working for them. He says, if you keep working for them, he says, well, we won't call you. I says, don't call me. It's a free country. And I slammed the door and walked out. So I was on timeout for about 2 weeks. And I could probably see Norman Whitfield back there stewing because I'm sure he fixed it, because within 2 weeks, I was doing double sessions at Motown every day, and no one ever said a word about me working for anybody else. Not a word.
So, the idea that, so Barry had, you and Theodore were free agents and were wreaking havoc all over the place. Honestly,
we were signed to Sussex. I was an artist, and we were producers signed to Sussex, and we were on a salary.
Right, and I mean, but I just want to talk to the audience that's going to hear this or hearing it now or going to hear it later. I mean, some of the dudes that you found, Jonathan Round, for instance, I mean, these are just the most obviously Rodriguez has become a pop icon, but I mean, you really had free reign on talent and stuff, and Barry kept the Funk Brothers, Jamerson, Pistol, those guys, he kept them under contract, but did not, so they were obligated essentially. They could obviously do cuts that you talked about, those sessions at 4 a.m. when Barry's lawyer would show up and be like, "What do you got?" He's like, "You're cool." But I mean, when they moved to LA, Barry was like, "Oh, okay, you're still under my thumb," and they, he put them up in a hotel. I mean, they didn't get treated well at all.
None of the Funk Brothers moved to LA. Not as the Funk Brothers. No, I was the only one out there. Period. I mean, Earl was out there a little bit, but he was working on the road and stuff. And then Jamerson came out there, and I had a chance to do a few sessions. But I was already out there for a year before Jamerson got out there. And then, I was at Mo West, and Jamerson had a few sessions. I had sessions, but the first day I moved out to L.A. and I let Motown know I was in town. They called me for a session. And they had tracking studios downstairs, and they had overdub studios upstairs. So anyways, I started this session at 10 a.m. in the morning, and that session didn't get done till 4 a.m. the next day. They kept bouncing me upstairs and downstairs.
You're getting scale and a half, dude. You were raking.
Yeah, it was very good because I was working for everybody. And then they had a situation where the contractor out there called me and says, well, we want you to do this show with the Jackson 5. I says, okay. Ben Barrett, I think is his name.
No, you told me this story. The guy left during the rehearsal, and you're like, I don't know about that. They're like, but you're on. Yeah. And you came in and worked it out.
We pay you scale and a half, so I had Michael in it too. So we got through it. That's the way I look at it. I had just played with Streisand with a 6-piece orchestra the week before, so Hello?
Yeah, no. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you, and then we can come back and reflect on it. Okay?
Okay.
But going back to, thank God, Kevin Russell. Thank you, Jake, for bringing up the name Joe Podorczyk, because Joe and I, we were in touch last night again. We've been in touch all these years since 1958, when I went to the Capital School of Music on Grand River in downtown Detroit with my dad. I was just going on 10 years of age, and I had this just horrible, anti-musical, unplayable old Epiphone guitar that my dad picked up for me for $5 because I was begging to try to unleash this rhythm and blues soul music that I was so captured by, so wallowing in back in that era when Little Richard and certainly Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and Jerry B. Lewis. I mean, are you kidding me? When these guys unleashed this powerful, authoritative, emotional, defiant, rebellious, outrageous, noisy, sexy music upon an unsuspecting semi-Caucasian public. I mean, I was absolutely hooked. You could probably tell by my choice of verbiage how excited I was then and how excited I remain today. But yes, Joe Podorczyk cauldrons of the Motown Hitsville, USA in Detroit with the gods.
It was
of
Earl.
authoritative music, the Funk Brothers. So that connection drives me to this very day, 60 years later.
All right, Mr. Coffey, you want to take a gander at who that is?
Oh, that's Ted Nugent.
1 for 1, baby.
All the time. Yeah, I used to go to Capitol Music all the time, and Joe and I went to high school together.
Okay, because I just want to, so wait, hold on. I mean, Capitol Music, can you take us through what that was?
Capitol Music was a music store on Grand River and Schoolcraft in Detroit. And Joe Fedorsic's dad ran it, and then Joe started running it when his dad passed away. And it was a music store. And for me, I used to go over there all the time because, like I say, Joe was in the same class as my sister. We all went to McKenzie High School in Detroit. So I'd go in there, and Joe would say, hey, this manufacturer sent me this new thing. It's called a Wawa pedal or whatever. He says, take it and try it, and if you like it, buy it. So I had anything I wanted to use. If I didn't like it, I brought it back. So Joe and I were buddies. That's how it worked.
I mean, was it the type of store where, I mean, it wasn't just an instrumental, was there music? Would there be bands playing in there at all?
No. Mainly, it was rooms, and each room had an instructor, and they would teach. That's what was going on there. And actually, I think I used Joe and Ray Manette and myself to play the string guitar melody on Scorpio.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. I was just, I think you'll be proud. I mean, of course, you know that was it Evolution with the Coffey,
Yes.
the guitar band? Like that, I found there were at least 2 copies of it sitting in a record store up in Prescott, Arizona, which is in northern Arizona. I just saw it, and I looked at the back, and we talked a lot about Bob Babbitt last time. He's on there.
Right.
And Podorsic's on there, and I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, so, I mean, I just don't remember. I remember Brokenshaw, you talking about him being the unsung funk brother that never gets mentioned. But what about, was Podorsic a funk brother?
No. Joe, Ray, and myself, what I did with Scorpio, because Mike Theodore and I were writing a lot of parts for horns and strings, so I said, why don't I write parts for guitars like horns and strings, which was the whole concept for the Evolution album, putting fuzz tone on guitars and making them horns and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So on Scorpio, I wrote it out for the horns in sections. Me and Ray Manette and Joe Podorsic would play. That allowed each one of us to put our fuzz tones on and everything. And then I had them play horn parts. That's kind of how, well, the 3 of us played horn parts. I charted it out for the guys. That's why you got 9 guitars on the melody.
But I mean, okay, so I mean, I got a lot of blowback because this Nugent interview is about an hour and a half long. It's
right.
I mean, you know, say what you want about anything else he thinks about. He some of the stories were folkloric in what he's done for people, and so I sort of felt a different human side of him. But what he said that caught a lot of people pushed back on it, but of course they weren't there. Is that he actually went out on the Chitlin circuit. This is like around the Amboy Dukes time, but he would play bass for Bo Diddley and those cats on the circuit. I mean, is that, I'm not saying if you know that to be true, but it wasn't unheard of for that to go down in terms of someone like Ted to be going out and playing with those cats?
I don't know, because I was playing at the 20 Grand here, and I was playing with Lyman Woodard and Melvin in the black clubs here, and I was packing them in at Maury Baker's and stuff. So I was doing it here. I can't speak for the road.
Dude, you were just, I mean, you were the busiest cat in the world. There was ever any, I know you said no the first time, but was there any ever offer to go on any kind of touring circuit for you, and you just said, no, I'm too busy?
Well, yeah, what happened was when I was did some sessions for Atlantic down in Miami, and Jerry Rexler says, well, I want you to come move down here and just work for Atlantic, and you can work for whoever else that you want, and we'll put you on a retainer as long as you're available for all the Atlantic sessions down here. And he gave me a figure, and I said, you don't have enough money, Jerry, to hire me down here. I don't have enough money. I I said, I got to tell you the truth, between Motown and Alan Dozier and Alan, and doing the dramatics and doing Wilson Pickett and Muscle shows and all this other stuff, I said, you don't have enough money to hire me to come down there and just work for Atlanta.
That was in the studio setting. It was in terms of being a road dog. You've never, ever, ever, ever gone on the road.
No, I don't do that. I just, I was working. First of all, I was doing like 18 sessions a week here in Detroit, and I did 18 sessions a week in LA at 3 hours a session. But here I was also doing that, and I was playing at Maury Baker's Lounge doing jazz and funk 3 nights a week and all this other stuff. And I was also recording at United for different acts. So I had a full plate, and I was making good money, and I was enjoying myself, and I was really learning how to play the guitar in front of audiences that weren't dancing. That was a big deal.
You
listening?
They were listening. You know, it's funny because I do both, man. Isn't there room for both?
Well, back then there wasn't, because I came out of a top 40 band,
right,
that were playing in the bars, and people would get drunk and throw each other through windows and shit, and they'd be that was the whole deal. They weren't really listening, they weren't listening to the music per se.
Right.
So when I went and sat in with Lyman Woodard and Melvin Davis at the Frolic, it was a small black club, and there were no dance floor, and people were just in there listening to the music. I was really amazed, and Don Davis was playing with them, and Don says, I'm leaving the gig, why don't you sit in? I sat in, and the people really liked me, so Lyman Woodard offered me the gig with him and Melvis. It was first George McGregor, then it was Melvin Davis on drums. And I just played there 4 nights a week, and it was great, man. We were just sitting down back in the corner there, and we were playing jazz and funk and everything else, and the people were listening. It was amazing.
Talking to Dennis Coffey, one of the most humble geniuses in music history. I want to read. I don't know if you ever worked with Don Randy at all, piano player.
I met him, but never worked with him. I met him out in L.A. He worked in the Big Potato, I think, when I lived out there.
Yeah, but like you said, L.A. was a restaurant town, not a bar town. That was one of the few places.
Really?
Well, you said that. I mean, it wasn't really a place like, unlike Maury Baker's in Detroit, which was definitely more of a live club scene. But I want to read you. I want to read you this story from our interview that I did with him. This is after Motown moved out to L.A., and I don't expect you to know it, but I do want you to just riff on it. He goes,
okay.
Barry Gordy heard some of the tracks we were doing for Phil Spector. He sent out one of his big-name acts for a recording date. Spector did. On this date, I was hired by H.B. Barnum to be the piano player. Earl Palmer was on drums, and James Jamerson was on bass. When we finished the date, this guy opens up a briefcase, and it's loaded with cash, and he starts paying the musicians. I said, what are you doing? He said, this is how we do it in the joint. I said, you can't do that no more. You need to have a union contract. All of a sudden, these 2 big black arms come around and hug me. It's James Jamerson, and he's saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. And, I mean, obviously you were a union member. I would assume you were part of the union in Detroit. But was there something? It appears to me, based on that story, it appears to me that a lot of times sessions that were done by artists who didn't know how to advocate for themselves, were less educated, or maybe were just taken advantage of. It was just paid in cash. And what Randy was saying was, keep the briefcases away. This is union stuff now. And that's why Jamerson was happy about it, because he had been ripped off the whole time.
I don't think, we here in Detroit, most of the sessions were union sessions, but before Motown, back in the days of Golden World and stuff like that, they weren't exactly union sessions. But we got paid in cash, and we got paid fairly, at that point. But if it wasn't for the union, we wouldn't have that scale thing happen. I'm still a member of the Musicians Union. They were the ones that made sure that we had a pension fund. They were the ones that made sure that we did get union scale. And so that whole thing just came around. But in the earlier days, it wasn't really there,
Can I ask you,
yeah.
I mean, taking yourself out of the equation, because like you told Wexler, you don't have enough money, or you told You know, you say this, it's a free country. I'm not working for. Like you didn't take any guff, but there.
No.
Did you know? You said you were paid fairly, but did you know of not necessarily a golden world, but in the days of pre-union when it was cash only, was there were there issues with people getting paid?
No, because we knew, and the guys. You had different producers in town. You had producers coming in from out of town, you know, and they would write us a check. Or with Motown and Motown, we went downtown and got our checks at Motown. But and then sometimes our checks, if it was if somebody came in and recorded from out of town a union session, then we would go to the union to pick up the check when the money came through. You know, so that's kind of how that worked. But in the early days, I'm talking early '60s,
right?
You know, it almost like every record store had a little studio in the back. And because of the success of Motown, we were getting paid cash money to do these sessions, and it was fair. I mean, whatever, you know, as it started out. I mean, early on, it was whatever the money was. We were working for Harry Balk and stuff. I mean, but it was, you know, and we just got paid, or we got a check. It wasn't always cash. But we got paid at the end of the session. They just wrote us out. You know, I remember producers coming in from around or wherever, and they brought their checkbook to the session, and we got done doing the session, and they either gave us cash or they wrote out a check.
Wow.
And we were fine. You know, all that time, I think I just got stiffed twice in all that time. I can't even remember who stiffed me, but in all that time, it was only twice I got stiffed for a session. Every other time I got paid.
Which, by the way, could you just drop some names of the record stores that had studios in them that you used to record in?
Oh, God. I don't even know the names of them.
You're just talking about, though, like it was like, because I remember when they opened, I think not Satellite, but Stax Records, the one contention for Cropper, his sister wanted to have a record store in the front. So there was always, so I mean, like, but these were actual stores where you'd go buy vinyl, but in the back there'd be a recording studio where you would make records.
Yeah, these were actual just record stores, and they had a little studio in the back, especially in Livernois, you know, in Detroit, in that area, where people would buy, you know, records there, and then they had a back room where you'd go in and you could make some recordings, you know. They'd have some kind of studio set up back there.
How do you spell Livernois?
Yeah, Liber, I don't know if it's Noise, something like that. You can probably, if you go Google it.
No, you know what's funny? Because so many times, like you and Mike talk about these names of places, and I'm like, I think I hear the pronunciation, but you can type whatever you think into Google. It's not necessarily going to recognize it. You know, it's unbelievable how many you know interesting names there are. You know, I putting your producer hat on for a minute, especially because, like, I mean, I've talked to a lot of producers who just are straight producers, and one of what they consider to be their talents is that the artist has this, you know, this concept that they can always do, you know, a better take, right? Like whatever they did, they can always do it better. And at a certain point, the producers, they hear something that is just exactly what they need, and they say, no, you're done, it's perfect, you're fine. And I wanted to ask you about, like, being that you were somebody who went in and played parts to songs for the most part. Obviously, you could stretch out if it was your own album, but you really knew how to play serve the song. Could you talk about being a producer and sort of having to get other artists who may not have, you know, maybe were only wearing the artist hat to back off and to realize that what they did was just perfect and just let it go and let's move on?
Well, you know, how we first learned how to produce is Mike Theodore and I were given a key to Tara Sherman's studio by Ralph Tarana. He gave us keys in an office in his studio. So what that meant is that at night when the studio wasn't booked, we were free because Mike used to do sound engineering and I did the arrangements and play guitar in the rhythm section. So we would bring all our bar band friends and all talent that we found in Detroit, and we would go record them and make demos of them over at Terra Sherma. We'd start the session at 3 a.m. in the morning when all the people got off of work.
Oh, this is
That's
unbelievable.
how we learned how to produce.
So, okay, so talk about what was the learning curve? Could you talk about an experience that was really a learning experience for you at that time?
Well, the whole idea is, I think earlier than that, Mylan Bogdan was an engineer. He also ended up a great engineer in Nashville and stuff. So he told me one day, he says, you're telling everybody what to play in here and helping them get the sound. And this was acoustic guitar stuff on some folky group that I was involved with, that I was involved to play on the session.
Right.
And I started taking more of the role of the producer because they needed help. He says, you're already doing it. So you ought to, that's what you should continue doing. He says, just doing that stuff. And then Mike Theodore and I, got together and we started off as partners as arrangers. People would hire us to do, the first session we did was, this guy had a song he wanted to do with one of the labels in New York, and he wanted a full orchestra. So me and Mike Theodore became partners, and we wrote horns and strings and the whole deal, and everybody was happy with it. So that's how that piece of it started, with the arrangement piece. And then gradually, we went from that, when we produced my first record, and then we produced Rodriguez, and Clarence Avon was the key to all this stuff, because he finally signed us as producers and gave us a salary, and we brought new acts like the Gallery and everybody to Sussex, and that's how that whole thing started.
I just want to be clear. The cat's name that went to Nashville, what was his name?
Went to Nashville.
No, the producer, the guy that was producing when you you said there was a guy who kind of lent you that advice. He goes, "You're already doing it." You just.
Oh yeah, that was Mylan Bogdan.
Yeah, Bogdan, right? So I just missed that. What exactly? You were telling people what to play, and he was saying, "Keep doing that," or was he saying, "Let them"?
He says, because I was going in the studio and listening to the playback, and said, "No, you change this, change that," and all that. So he said, "You're already doing it." So he says, "You should just do more of it." He encouraged me to do that.
What were you at that time? I know it depended basically on the genre, although you said were genres really evident? Were labels like something that were brought to the forefront in terms of how you would speak about the music? Because it just seemed like, I understand that, the evolution versus some folk trio versus Motown, it's very different sounding music, but like when you were there listening to playback, were there certain types of differences based on the genre of music that you were producing?
Well, it depends on who the customer was. If it was a record label and they had a group, and the group had their own style and they wanted that, we just tried to get that done on schedule and on budget so that everybody was happy. As far as style, I just did a thing a couple of years ago called the Cambodian Space Project I did on my own with a group, and the guitar player was from Tasmania and the lead singer was from Cambodia. And the whole album was in Cambodia.
My God.
So we put it together for this investor that liked the group, and he got this group in Cambodia that I'd like you to produce. He told me, so I did it. And so I did him a budget and a proposal, put it all together, and we got it done. And he was happy with it when we got it done.
Dennis, early on, you have to forgive me, the studio that you and Mike were allowed to use after hours, what was the name of it? Terra Sherma. And you would recruit cats. Who were the cats that, like, for instance, like in LA, you had, through Lou Adler and Peter Asher, they put together the section with Lee Sklar and Russ Kunkel and Cooch and Craig Durkee and all those guys are great friends of mine. But I'd love to know who you were pulling out of those clubs. Was it just, not even people that hadn't necessarily had any longevity, but did you eventually have a band like that?
Well, what I did is, Mike and I, we would pull some of the Motown cats. We couldn't get Jamerson, but Bob Babbitt we could certainly get. And then we'd use Uriel and Pistol, the two Motown drummers. And on Scorpio, that's Earl Van Dyke playing piano. I met Eddie Willis. We used him on guitar all the time. He played at Motown. Motown, there was only a few that, like Robert White and Joe Messina and those guys, and Earl Van Dyke generally couldn't work for anybody else, nor could Jamerson. But Babbitt certainly could, and a lot of other people. So we had, and Don Davis used to play guitar, so we had our own rhythm sections of these guys. guys that we would put together if it was a vocal group. And if it was a self-contained group like Rare Earth, we would. But the first Rare Earth album we did was I played guitar on the thing because their guitar player got lost and couldn't find his way to the studio, so I had to play guitar on it.
Yeah, I'm always surprised that this didn't happen more often before GPS. I don't know how people find their way around with that stuff, man.
I don't know, man, but that's what we did. And as far as the artists go, it's a collaboration. You don't boss the artists around and say, they know. You have to collaborate with an artist. They know when they've done their best. As long as it's about the feel.
Right.
Right. The
Right.
feel is what rules. It's not about perfect intonation all the time or perfect notes. Sometimes I've done a studio thing where I play guitar on a song, even on my own stuff, and I get it in the first take, and the feel's just there. Then I say, fine, let's go on to the next song.
That's just unbelievable. I mean, the guy, do you remember who the cat was that asked you to put the full orchestra on the album from New York?
Oh, boy. I think his name might have been Steve Mancha.
Wow. What about this cat, Gordon Staples? Who was that cat?
Okay, Gordon Staples was a very fine violinist. He was the concert master for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra.
Jesus.
And his wife, Dee Staples, also was in that band. And his son, Bernard, his wife retired, and Gordon passed away, so Bernard is playing with the symphony now. So our idea was, when we did strings, is we would hire Gordon to help us to make sure we wrote what needed to be written, and pretty much made him the leader of the section, so he could help us. Not only, we wrote all the stuff out, but he would give us that extra thing, and he said, the bowing technique for this thing, you might want to do that, stuff like that. So that's who Gordon was. He was like, he had Stradivarius, man. This guy was amazing.
Jeez. I mean, because when I listen back to some of that album, or at least a couple tracks, how did you fit? Was it all was your guitar? Didn't seem like your guitar was that prevalent in the mix. It was just very, very string oriented.
Now, which one is that now?
The string thing.
Oh, the
strung
thing
out.
that
Strung out. Well, it was just, I listened to one track and I was having a hard time finding where. I guess what I'm trying to say is how big an orchestra did he bring into the studio? How many cats were in there at one time?
Well, you have to understand, it's Paul Reiser. I still talk to him all the time, okay? Paul Reiser was one of the great arrangers at Motown.
Wow.
So he was super at this. So anyways, when we did the album at Motown, we would do the rhythm section first. There were 11 of us in Studio A, and the whole job was you go in, and we called it a roadmap. They'd have a master rhythm sheet. And so your job was to sit down and look at a piece of music you never saw before. And then you had to play it right because the arranger and the producer were there. You had to play the chart right. Then you had to get a feel, and usually between the arranger and producer, so they were happy. And we did one song an hour with no mistakes and made them hits. That's what we did.
I think I wonder about it today. Now I don't know. I think it's the biggest. I've learned over time it has really nothing to do with analog versus digital recording, but it has everything to do with what you talked about. Was this urgent? I always wondered, why does the music sound? Why is there an urgency and a pulse to this music? And I'm not just talking about the Motown music. I'm just talking about any of the major studio albums that were cut on any of the labels in the bag of time that I love, which is the late 60s and early 70s. Why was it so urgent? And obviously there was the human component to it. They hadn't outsourced human rhythm to drum machines and stuff. But on top of that, it was this, what you just talked about, where the expectation was you needed to crank. I think you said you needed to do one song in 3 hours at Motown. Is that right?
No, we did one song an hour.
One song an hour.
Yeah.
Which means
the idea was the Funk Brothers, we were playing together at the same time.
Right.
We would bounce ideas off of each other. So that's what you hear is the result of the group was better than any one of us could have played by ourselves. It was teamwork. People don't realize that. The Funk Brothers worked together as a team. We were all friends. We all worked together to get the job done. and we were all bouncing stuff off each other, so that that live, vibrant sound, there was no click track in that stuff. We just counted off and go. That's what you're hearing is real musicians playing together, making music.
This sort of swings back to what we were talking about before, but obviously you are still a member of the musicians union. But how did I don't know? How come that became a loss? How come not even? I don't want to talk about unions in general, but it's so common sense to me. Bob Cranshaw, the great bass player, who on top of everything else, did Sesame Street, played with Sonny Rollins, and was on Lee Morgan's album, The Sidewinder, which is really one of the first albums to be considered where the bass was being used not just for backbeat, but also for it's just a very seminal album. And he, towards the end of his life, he just was adamant about educating younger cats about the need to be in the union. And everybody was in the union back then. Everyone I talk to now, or I hang out with, I don't care if it's Gadsden or Keltner or you. I mean, it was a common sense. I'm just, how do you feel?
Well, also, I get a pension from the musicians union, and so are the other cats that played in all that stuff. That was a whole thing that the union did for us, not only union scale, but at the end of the day, all these records I played on that are covered under union contract resulted in me getting a pension every month from the union.
I guess my question is, did the union become a less attractive? Now again, you were working so much that essentially those dues every month were nothing compared to what you were actually taking in. And obviously in the long term, it was great. You get a pension, you still get royalties.
But you don't get royalties as a sideman. No, you don't get royalties as a sideman.
Or if you were responsible for creating the song, right?
So if you're a writer.
Writer, yeah, right.
Or, So the whole idea was union scale quarterly. As far as the union dues quarterly, it's like $42 every 3 months. It's not a big deal. But there's also a work dues that was part of the union contract that went in there to feed the pension fund and all the other stuff. That was all part of the cost of recording a union sketch session.
Do you find like younger cats? I just feel, was it that the kind of the record industry just contracted so much that people said it wasn't, and there weren't enough dates, so that's why it's not worth joining the union? I mean, do you feel, how many younger cats do you run into that are like, yeah, I'm members of the union?
Well, here's the deal. If you probably look at L.A., Nashville, and you look at New York, you're going to find people in the musicians union. I'm in the musicians union now because, that's just what I do. I've been in the union for, almost 50 years now. I mean, but that's kind of what you do. But nowadays, you don't have, in a city like Detroit, you don't have sessions going on like that. You got a few small groups doing a few things here and there and stuff, but you don't have those kind of sessions going on here. And the only places they're going on a regular basis where they're all union and you've got studio guys actually making a living are Nashville and L.A. and New York, Other than that, in Detroit, you don't have those kind of sessions going on here like that.
And
it's sad, but there's no record companies here to do that. But the label I'm signed with, Mac Avenue Records, is here, and that's great because my album on, that's out now, Down by the River, is on Mac Avenue Detroit Music Factory, and they have offices here and they have offices in L.A. So at least there's one label here that's got a presence for the jazz thing, which is great.
Can you talk about, you probably don't have enough hindsight on the new album yet, but when you listen to your playing, obviously, you play, I was listening back to my interview with Danny Korchmar today from the section, and you were playing a song off a band that he was in called Joe Mama. This is before the section, and he's like, when I listen to that, and that was from like the late 60s, he's like, it sounds like anxious and nervous and Rush, that solo, and I feel like I hope I've become a better player. And we've talked about, we've spanned a lot of your early career, and you seem pretty grounded, and probably just because you had all that experience in the studio. But when you listen to your sound today, how has it changed? Do you feel like you're continuing to grow, or I mean,
well, yeah. I mean, here's an example. My new album, I've got jazz standards, Polka Dots and Moonbeams, Sunlight,
Right.
Shadow of Your Smile, all that stuff. So what's happened is that I've matured as an artist, and I've always played jazz. I mean, I used to hang with Wes Montgomery, and I got to know him. I got to know Joe Pass out in L.A. and hang with those guys. And so even when I was growing up in the 20s, I was playing, we did some jazz stuff with Lyman and Melvin and stuff. And so, I was always playing jazz, but this is probably the first real jazz album that wasn't contemporary jazz. Where I have upright bass and we're doing swing and all this stuff is the one I have now. I mean, it's just a matter of, as an artist and everything, I'm still studying the guitar. I'm not done.
I know.
I saw Segovia play when he was 92, and I played with Les Paul when he was 92.
You did?
Yeah,
Oh
I did.
God.
And I have an aunt. My Aunt Allie could sit down at the piano at 95 and read ragtime with no mistakes.
Well, why do you consider this your first? I mean, it's just so funny. I mean, any tune. I guess I just have a very loose definition of jazz or improvisation, but I mean, you're talking about the American Songbook. This was really the first album you did with American Songbook tunes. That's why you consider it a jazz album, and maybe it was somewhat acoustic with an upright bass. I don't know what kind of guitar.
Yeah, it's swing, and I was using my L4 jazz guitar, the Gibson, the big L4 jazz box.
Do you think that on this album, I'm just going to go out on a limb. You can riff back any way you want, but I just caught up with a buddy of mine, my peer group. He was playing a live show in San Rafael, California. And he was doing all these Bob Dylan tunes, and he just turned them upside down and inside out. And when I listened to, when I did interview George Porter, the great bass player, he would talk about with pre-meters, they would take Stephen Stills tunes and just turn them upside down and inside out. Now, so for my question for you is, was your onus to play the standards like as close to the original as possible, or did you want to put on your own? Did you want to put your own flair on those originals, make them your own?
Here's the deal with jazz players. You play the melody of the song, fairly close.
Right.
It can be a little loose, and then you improvise against the changes. That's all it is. So you're not playing the melody to the song all the way through. All you're doing is you're playing the head. That's the tune. You play it once. You do solos, and you come back to the head at the end. I mean, that's basically the format that the jazz has always done. And I never played the same solo twice. I couldn't remember it anyway.
You're so. I mean, dude, you never play the same song the same way once. Never.
Right.
It's just.
I don't. And I never play the same solo. After I take a solo, it's a musical point in time, and it's gone, and I'm not even sure what the hell I do sometimes. Sometimes I got my eyes closed, and I'm at another level of consciousness, and stuff just comes out. In the bandstand, the guys look at me and say, "Where'd that come from?" And I have no idea.
That's exactly what Terry. You people say from the Sons of Champion. They said, "How did you do that, man?" And he's like, "I really have no idea." And he's like, it's like kind of like Socrates. You have to know what you don't know. I mean, I think also it speaks to once you get to that point of having your rudiments so strong that you can sort of forget all of that on the bandstand.
Yeah, you're in a different level of consciousness when you've got a good groove going and you're doing a solo, and it just whatever comes out, and the band's right with me. I mean, if we go in a direction, they just jump on that because we're playing off of each other, and away we go. I mean, it's fun because at the end of the tune, you've taken it. Each time you play that song, you go somewhere else, and that's good. I never give them charts. My guys, I give them chord sheets.
See, that's like Gene. That's like Gene Page. Dude, I hope you live till you're 250 years old, man. I mean, this is like absolutely essential because I mean, for whatever reason, I guess it's because we have the technology. But I mean, people will spend. You had an hour to cut a tune. People will spend 45 minutes just to get a bass drum sound that they like now. I mean, the amount of obsession with perfection is really And again, they're not worried about, they don't have time constraints, but I just feel like that's kind of the whole point of it, is like the companies knew they were paying you scale or scale and a half, and it was their money, and so they expected you guys to be efficient with your time and productive with your time. And
Mike Theodore and I, the common budget back then for an album was like 50 grand. And Mike Theodore and I had that budget to work with, and when we had a project, and the label believed in the project, just like Rodriguez, same thing. But with Rodriguez, he was so nervous we had to take him in the studio first with his guitar and do 4 songs and build the band around him, and then we could start bringing him in with the band. But we always came in on time, with a quality piece the label liked, and it was always within the budget. That was our job as producers to do.
I got one more. You're 1 for 1 today on the Name That Voice. I got one more for you, and then come back and break it down.
All right.
So, and what was his name?
Ron Carter or
Ollie Jackson, who was Milt Jackson's brother.
Ollie Jackson? This is great.
Yeah.
All right, so they had a trio or something?
And so I asked him if I could fit in on bass, and that's the group with Elvin Jones, and I sat in with him, and I played like 3 sets.
Preston, this is blowing my mind. This is so ridiculously. But this was. But I want to be clear. You did not go to the black clubs pre-Army. This was after you came back.
Right.
And
Sure.
you didn't know Elvin before you went to the Army?
Oh no, not at all.
So you get back to Detroit with a lot more vocabulary, a lot more knowledge, a lot more confidence. Tell me about that time. What club? Tell me about that night when you decided to go. I mean, that to me is the coolest story ever.
Well, given the fact that it was, let me see, it was at least 63 years ago. Or 60,
At least, yeah,
years ago.
right.
I do remember. Well, first of all, it was called the West End Cafe.
Mm.
And it was an after hours, they didn't have music during, it was like a restaurant. And so, like at 2 in the morning, Yusuf would take his band, which was Tommy Flanagan, Elvin Jones, and Ollie Jackson. So I went there and I just said, "Can I sit in?" And Ollie was tired. He'd been working for 5 hours already.
Unbelievable. Yeah, he needed a break.
And so, right. And so I sat in. Now, the thing that blew my mind was that they let me play the next set. So I said, well, gosh, I must be doing something right, because I know Alan Jones is going to put up with that.
I mean,
Well, I gave away his last name. Does that ring a bell?
What are you talking about, Ron Carter?
No, I mentioned his last name, but that's a guy that I feel like. Anyway, he's a great keyboardist and was working with Frank Zappa a lot, but lived in Detroit for a long time. It was Don Preston.
Don Preston, I don't know. See, when you talk about the where he was playing, that I was like in high school or grade school even. That was like before my time.
That was before Coffey's time. I mean, because honestly, the West End Cafe, and there was another place called the Bluebird Inn, and I'm like.
My time, I remember going to the minor key to hear music.
Now, what was the minor? Tell me about the minor key.
The minor key was later than those 2 clubs. It was I'm trying to think. I think it was on, I know it was in Detroit. I think it was on Dexter. It was called the Minor Key. And I don't think they served alcohol. That was the same kind of club as those other two. But it was a bigger club and people could stay late at night. They weren't serving alcohol. And I saw Kenny Burrell there. I think I saw some of the other guys, some of the jazz guys.
Did you see Wes there? You saw Wes there?
No, I used to see Wes at the Drone Lounge on Dexter, and I used to sit right in front of him. He'd come in here for a week, and I'd go there every night, and I'd sit right in front of him, and I got to know Wes. I used to hang out with him and listen to him play and everything. He's an amazing guy, real nice guy.
So I just know that Coffey was not. So but you knew when you say they were before your time. It just means that you couldn't necessarily get there. You didn't have a car, but were you hip to those places? Did you know what was going on there?
I didn't know because you just hear, like I say, I would go to a music store. Some of the older musicians sometimes would talk about it. But I was like in high school, I was like 12 or 13 years old or something, so it was not in my world, that kind of stuff.
I'd love you to talk to the audience about, could you just relay, last time you talked about, I think Wes broke one of the frets on his guitar, broke one of the strings, and he had to play, he was just doing something, he played right through it, but...
No, Wes didn't break a string. Wes was taking a solo. And he heard something in his head, and there wasn't enough frets on the guitar to accommodate his idea, so he went right off the end of the neck. Because those last few notes he heard in his head, there weren't enough frets on the guitar. That's my, can you not necessarily even a sort of notes in the head technique thing, but could you just talk about, give me a good Joe Pass story? Joe Pass, I think the funniest story is I used to go over his house, and I took a few lessons from Joe and everything, is that he was playing with Ella Fitzgerald, and she came to Detroit. So I went to see Ella, and then I got a message backstage to Joe to see if I could go back there and meet Ella Fitzgerald. So Joe Pass, the jokester that he is with his big cigar, he introduces me to Ella Fitzgerald as a disco kid. The look she gave me was priceless.
So this was upon your return to Detroit after LA.
Yes.
That the disco kid.
Yeah, but Joe Pass was such a phenomenal player. He was another one, him and Wes and all those guys. I mean, back in the day you had Tal Farlow and all these guitarists, and I used to listen to all of them, and even Les Paul back then. They were all just amazing jazz guitarists. These guys could all play stuff, so you could learn from all those guys. And Kenny Burrell.
Well, no, I'm not sure. Are you hip to the cat Eddie Duran?
Eddie Duran.
I mean, he was part of the Manny Duran was in Jader's group, but he was a West Coast guy. But I have this album that I can't stop listening to with Vince Guaraldi. So it's just piano, bass, and guitar.
Yeah.
I know you were pretty hooked up with Maury Baker. You'd have those ferocious trios, but they always included a drummer. Did you ever find yourself wanting to, or in a drummerless trio?
I never did, no, except when I played at the Iridium in New York, and they were supposed to have a drummer there, but they never had a drummer, so I had to do Scorpio on all my stuff with keyboards, with the Les Paul group, so we had rhythm guitar and upright bass and lead guitar and keyboards, and so I had to do Scorpio and all that stuff without a drummer. That was interesting.
Okay, I just really want, you say interesting, I need to know the fun, so, knowing that you weren't expecting it going, you probably found out 5 minutes before the gig the drummer wasn't coming.
Yes.
So how did you hold that together, knowing that it is predicated, so much of that is predicated on having the foundation of drum kit rhythm?
Well, it's like anything else, the guitar is just as good at rhythm as it is at lead.
Right.
I mean, you can play good rhythm on guitar, so, and I had a rhythm guitar in it anyways. So the whole thing... Fine, what are we going to do? You just keep going.
Wait, the Les Paul group? Who was in the group?
That was Lou Powell, I think was he.
Right.
He was the rhythm guitar player with Les Paul, and then they had this girl was playing upright bass, and they had a keyboard player. I can't remember the name. That was quite some time ago, but it was fun. It's like when you have a job to do, whether you're in the studio or whether you're in a club. If something comes up that's not exactly a perfect condition, the show must go on. So you just do the best you can with what you got.
Before I let you go, Dennis Coffey, I'm just going to read this from Mike Theodore, and I one day I hope that I'll ever find any of this stuff, but to me, I just find it, when you teamed up and started a company, I just want to read off what he said here and ask you about, because this is really where music lies for me. It's the essence of it is that Norman Granz would say something to the effect, I don't care if this Oscar Peterson album sells 10 copies. It's what my label, Pablo, or whatever. It's what my label stands for. Okay, and so this kind of, I just want to know what you guys were thinking, and this is what Mike said. He goes, we had Sussex at the time, and there was a group called Mutsy. There was a group called The Assemblage I had done for Westbound. These were all groups from the 60s, psychedelic time, when the SRC, Bob Seger were there. There was a group called Yukon that came out of Ontario, and a group called Amish. This is the kind of music the labels couldn't promote adequately. I mean, what were you guys thinking? Out of take one of those groups, you were going across the border, or these guys were coming to Detroit. How did you even find these cats?
You know what? I think the manager of a couple of the Canadian groups contacted us, and Mike kind of put that together. But as far as Mutsy, his dad ran this bar downtown, which is kind of a dubious bar with a lot of hookers in it. So anyway,
wait, what was the name of the bar?
Geez, I can't think of the name.
It was just called the Dubious.
Anderson's Gardens. Anderson's Gardens.
So his dad
Anyways,
yeah.
Mutsy, I think, somehow approached us, and he had cut a demo because his sister played, and his brother played bass, and his sister played keyboard, and he had another guy that was a drummer. And Mutsy was the guy that he was doing a fuzz tone thing. It was, when rock started going into that more progressive thing with the fuzz tone guitar and everything. And I said, what is that sound? Because that's the first time I heard a real fuzz tone guitar. I didn't know what it was. And Mutsy showed me, he had this tone bender. He said, well, you do this. And he says, you turn it on, let the battery wear down a little bit so you get a mellower, a cleaner, distorted sound and so forth. So I learned that from him. But that was that group, and we did that one album. But Sussex didn't know what to do with it, just like they didn't know what to do with Rodriguez. It's not that Clarence didn't try, but in the situation that he had, sometimes you don't. The Scorpio thing took off, and the Gallery took off, and then Buddha got irritated with Clarence because the Gallery was pop. Bubblegum. He says, "You guys, we didn't hire you guys to do that." And Clarence said, "Well, I'll do what I want."
That's right. You can't win. You can't win. You can't win for. You can't do it. You can't win for trying. It's like you do bubblegum stuff. They don't like it. Then you do something like Mutsy. It's just like.
Well, the Gallery sold, with Jim Golden. And we first saw him and his buddy playing in a bar on 8 Mile, just two guitars singing it, and the parking lot was packed. And I said to Mike, "What's going on there? We need to check it out." And there was Jim Golden, another guy that he's singing what he does, nice to be with you and all that stuff, and the place is packed. So that's how we ended up getting him together.
So with the Detroit Guitar Band, would there be a budget for Sussex for you guys to go out and tour, or did you just not even want to? Would you go and tour and promote the album?
That wasn't what Sussex did.
Exactly. So I knew that was going to be your answer because, like with your new album today, I also always find it interesting. I felt like with so not necessarily Sussex, but with Capitol. I mean, or James Taylor reprise. There was never any. How would you expect to gain? Not that you were looking necessarily to gain. Obviously, everybody wants to get a hit, but I mean,
Sure.
the hit would only come via the radio with you guys because you were not taking it to the people per se.
Yeah, that's how it was back in the day. You got hit records on the radio, and some of the groups tour, but the labels, unless like Motown had a management arm that also managed their groups, and so they had road managers and they had that booking agent thing and everything. But the big labels, at least the ones like Sussex, didn't have anything like that. So I went out when I was signed to Strut Records in 2011. They were in Europe, and I was signed to the booking agency was the name of the agency that was tied into this thing. So I went out and toured. I did the East Coast. I did Bonnaroo. I did South by Southwest, and I played in London and Paris a couple times. So I was out there doing it. But then at the end of the day, it just didn't work out to be that profitable. When you first go out that first time, you don't make that much money. You're supporting the album, and you go. We had a 8-passenger van we were riding around with and all that stuff. So
it's still going on. I mean, if it makes you feel, I mean, it's still going on today. I mean, that's how Cats.
Sure.
I mean, was there a definitive track or two that did take off on regional radio for you?
Well, what happened was I did the Evolution album, okay, and Clarence Avon heard Scorpio a year before it became a hit and told Clarence Avon, that's the hit on that record. Quincy heard that already.
Wait, hold on. You just said Avon heard it and said it to Quincy?
No, Quincy Jones heard that.
Quincy heard it.
Yeah, and Clarence played that for Quincy. And Quincy thought it was a great album, and he pointed out to Clarence, he says, Scorpio will be the hit off this record.
Wow.
That was a year before it became a hit.
Holy
But
cow.
he knew it. Quincy heard that.
Did you play the 20 grand?
Yeah, I played there backing up different artists, and also the 20 grand. Frantic Ernie had a dance because the other half of the 20 grand was like a big hall where they had the teenage dances in that, and they had a metal detector that you came in and you played in there. So I played some dance house in the backside of the 20 grand, and in the front side, the lounge part, I played with Edwin Starr there in his band, and I played with the Velvelettes in their band at 20 grand.
Because when I interviewed George Clinton, that's where he played a lot with Parliament Funkadelic, or at least maybe, when they moved out there. And Martha Reeves played there a lot.
Yeah, I just saw Martha the other day at this big concert of colors we did. But I played on George Clinton, I Want to Testify. I played on that record.
Oh, you did?
And I played, yeah, that's me and Eddie Willis playing guitar on I Want to Testify. I recorded at United, and I also played on some cuts on overdubbed some cuts on the first Funkadelic album for George.
Well, another 65 minutes in the book, Dennis. I will send you. I might have to transcribe some of this interview, but it's right now. There's some pretty classic characters in this first book, and I'm looking to do a smorgasbord of musicians from not just regional, but all different types of cats that are almost ungenre. Can't really put them into any one genre. So take a look at the content when you get it, and if you're on board for it, just sign that and get it back to me. It's really an honor.
All right, we'll do it.
Thank you, brother. Have a beautiful day, Dennis.
All right, you too. Okay.
Bye bye.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Another one of the books with Dennis Coffey, beautiful cat and an amazing musician who's been through it all. We've got a bunch of interviews coming up next week here on Power Talk. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you next week.